For decades, neuroscientists have offered opposing theories for how our brains process the risks and rewards of daily life. Some thought our brains dedicate the most energy into managing everyday realities. Others thought our brains fire up when we are thrown something unexpected. Well, now we have an answer, and it might make you rethink how you live. I'm Samantha Salinger-Morris, and you're listening to the Morning Edition from The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. Today, science reporter Angus Dalton on findings by researchers from the University of Sydney, published in the Journal of Neuroscience, which might help explain how our brains are functioning in this age of information overload. It's June the 29th. Angus, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
Okay, I can't wait to delve into this with you. You always have such fun stories. And for this latest one, people have got to go check out the photos on our mastheads because you had a cap on your head covered with electrode sensors. And then neuroscientists, they came at you. They filled these sensors with blue goo. What was going on, Angus?
Well, yeah, I basically just signed up to do this random brain experiment, which sounded kind of fine. I thought it would just be sort of like the cap and the wires. And then I walked into this sort of nondescript room at the University of Sydney at this lab and saw these 5 massive syringes on the table filled with blue goo. And I was like, what are they? What are they for? They look terrifying. Literally it looked like a movie prop. But as you say, it was all good. It was just to actually inject kind of onto my scalp this electroconductive gel to help with all of those electrodes and wires. But the reason that I was getting hooked up to all of this vaguely terrifying equipment was so the scientists could track my brain waves to see what was happening during this very interesting experiment in terms of what actually happens in our brains when we are surprised.
Let's go through this because there are 2 camps. I didn't know this until reading your stories, but there are 2 camps that are divided over how our brains react to surprise. So what are the 2 opposing camps, I guess, as it were?
Yeah, I had no idea either. But basically, I think the first thing to understand is that scientists, including the lead author of this study, Dr. Ruben Rideau, they're very interested in how our brains operate efficiently because our brains are the most extraordinary computing devices on Earth, right? They can compute the equivalent of a billion, I think that's called a hexaflop, the equivalent of a billion mathematical equations per second running on power equivalent to a dim light bulb or like a little fish tank pump that you might have for like some goldfish on your desk. Tiny amount of input energy, but just this huge amount of actual calculating that it does on a second to second basis, right? So scientists are really keen to dig into this. One as a sort of the brain remains very mysterious organ. So we want to know as much about it as we can to understand ourselves, but also because it does have this exceptional efficiency, which could be extremely useful for us as we try and scale up our sort of computational ability as well. So they were looking at how we react to, as you say, the unexpected, which is obviously a really important thing that the brain does to keep us alive. We need to be able to handle threats. Back, 20,000 years ago, it might have been cave lions and avalanches, and now it's speeding e-bikes, zipping down the pathway. You need to be able to jump out of the way. So the big question was, what does the brain prioritize? And as you said, there are these 2 opposing camps. One group believes that the brain pours more mental energy, if you like, into reacting to predictable day-to-day events. And this makes sense, right? Because you are handling those events more frequently. So it makes sense that the brain would be tuned to respond to these events that it encounters all the time. That would be a very efficient use of the brain's energy. An opposing camp finds it that the brain actually really fires up when there's a surprise, so it can capture more information, so it can respond to those surprising events. Because if something's taking you by surprise, it's probably really important, whether that's you've just walked across like a big pile of berries or cash, you know what I mean? You need to be able to react quickly to that to capitalize on that windfall. But then also if it's a predator or the speeding e-bike or some other threat, you also need to respond really quickly. So these 2 opposing ideas about how we might respond to the unexpected versus the expected.
Okay, I love this so much because I'm very interested in the real world and I think even political ramifications of this. But we'll get into that in a minute because, first of all, just tell us really briefly how your brain was actually put to the test and then what scientists have actually found. Because, of course, they have also tested this on 40 other participants, I believe.
Yes, yes, indeed. So, yeah, so they hooked me up with all of these electrodes, put the conductive gel onto my head. I went into a room, I sat my head into kind of this brace. I rested my chin and there was like a forehead rest to make sure that my head stayed still. There was a screen in front of me. And basically the first thing that happened was this little donut appeared on the screen and I had to follow it around the screen with my eyeballs. And the scientists wanted to see when my pupils were dilating and when I was surprised. And also sort of, I guess, where the movements of my eyes across the screen. And they presented me with this game, which appeared very simple, but actually to be able to test surprise is actually a really difficult thing. So this game was actually really sophisticated because what it was doing was finding ways to teach my brain to expect something and then to undercut that or surprise it, which is actually a really hard thing to do in sort of, the 30 to 45 minutes that they had with participants in this study. But what they were doing there was actually teaching, they had these patterns that the dots would appear in. And to me, they seemed random, but subconsciously, my brain started to learn where these dots were more likely to appear. So I could actually react faster to the ones that I predicted, but then they'd send me up. And with that location game, they were testing whether I was better at remembering the location of the dots I expected, or was I better at remembering the location of the surprise dots? And what they discovered was that, as you might expect, you do react a lot quicker to expected events. But I was a lot better at remembering, me and the other 40 participants were all better at remembering and identifying exactly where the surprise dots landed. And you can actually see this in the data. It's really interesting. So you can sort of see with the expected dots, my brainwaves spiked to a certain level. And I was doing it in a fewer milliseconds. So I was doing that a lot quicker. But when I was surprised, the brain spike, and you can see it on the graph, there's this brain spike that goes a lot higher when it's a surprise dot, which kind of shows that the brain is slowing down, kind of like the researchers say, almost like making a software update to the brain to be like, hang on, that's not what we expected. We're going to stop for a second. We're going to widen the aperture and we're going to take in more information so we can better possibly respond to things in the future, which was really, really interesting. So it is a little bit slower, but you do take in more information. And I think you can sort of picture this in your day-to-day life, right? Like I use the example of, it made me think of sometimes you drive home from work or something, or a route that you've done a million times, and you get home and you're like, oh my God, I don't remember the last 15 minutes. Like I was totally on autopilot, right? Like your brain is just really efficiently reacting to the turns of the road and the stop signs that you've done a million times, right? But if you get rear-ended by a Mr. Whippy van, you know that you're going to remember the sight of that big colorful ice cream truck smashing into the back of your Toyota Corolla forever, right? So it kind of makes sense. What was interesting though is both of these processes, the auto mode and the kind of slower info gathering mode, they're both really, really efficient. And using new high resolution sort of brain imaging, they were able to see that the brain makes the choice which mode it's going to operate in within 50 to 100 milliseconds, which is just insanely fast. So the brain kind of has its cake and eats it too. We're actually really good at doing both things, Sam, which is another reason why neuroscientists and computational scientists really want to understand more about how our amazing brains work.
After the break,
there has been some neurological research into what happens when we are exposed to extreme content online, very emotive content online.
Okay, so you've walked us through both pathways are efficient for the brain. It just chooses whether to react quickly with less detail or more slowly but with vivid detail and better memory of the event. Do you think that this study, these findings have particular relevance now, I guess, in an age of information overwhelm, particularly politically, in the way that Donald Trump is famous for so-called flooding the zone with crazy stories. It might be about immigrants eating their pets, which was untrue. And many believe that as a way of distracting American voters from, say, pressing matters that perhaps the president wants them to look away from, like inflation or the war. Does this perhaps explain why that flooding the zone works so well?
I think that's a really interesting idea because certainly there has been some neurological research into what happens when we are exposed to extreme content online, very emotive content online, like, the Trump's claim that migrants are coming for the dogs and the cats, something that is very emotional that some people might interpret as a threat. And my understanding is that what this kind of content can do is shift mental energy from the prefrontal cortex, which is a part of the brain that is kind of handles upper reasoning, if you like, planning, working memory, making sort of those more reasonable decisions. And it can fire up structures that are a bit more perhaps emotive or handle threats in the brain, like the amygdala. So what that does, I suppose, is it takes people from a state of mind where they're thinking about things calmly and rationally and perhaps a bit more analytically. And it's engaging the parts of our brain that respond more emotionally. And I think it's pretty hard to argue against the observation that our political discourse has become a lot more emotional, particularly with social media. Everyone already knows as well that social media is geared towards the negative, the extreme, the angry, the fear-mongering. And that sort of feeds into the brain as well. But like I said, when you're dealing with that kind of flooding the zone content that is designed to be distracting, extreme, surprising, you're possibly thinking a little bit more emotionally. And I think that maybe allows you to be a little bit more easily distracted, easily manipulated. And it also, overloads that prefrontal cortex. And the other interesting thing as well is I think part of the reason that we rally behind particular political parties, particular political figures, is because, our brains can get really overwhelmed by trying to come up with our own opinions on every single political issue. And because of this, as you say, flooding the zone, there's always a million things being discussed at the same time, right? So if you have someone that you agree with, it's kind of maybe a little bit of like cognitive deloading. If someone say, oh, I'm starting to like what this Pauline Hanson person says because of this one thing that might have something to do with the workplace or something, maybe that leaves you more open to start adopting some of her other rhetoric on migrants, for example. Obviously, this is, theoretical brain stuff meeting theoretical political stuff, but it's certainly an area where a lot of sort of political scientists and neuroscientists are looking into.
I realize this is absolutely not what the scientists that you have spoken to, this wasn't the focus of their study. They haven't looked at this, but I do wonder, or maybe I hope that this is perhaps on their to-do list. Because just as a quick aside, I have seen analysis in the United States, which says that our brains actually are not built to handle the amount of information that's now regularly thrown our way. And when there's so much misinformation, perhaps sometimes inaccurate information throwing around about, institutions that are key to democracy, whether it's the justice system or the way government works or the way press is handled and, having a free press. It's just interesting that I've seen that some people think that this could even threaten American democracy, just this amount of information that people are flooded with. And then perhaps from a neurological perspective, just not equipped to, I guess, have their rational brain switched on the whole time and to process that information.
You're totally right. Absolutely. And I've been thinking about this a lot when it comes to like AI as well, because we're seeing a lot of AI generated content. And it's exactly what you're saying. AI is being used to generate a lot of this social media content, and it's obviously geared towards grabbing people's attention and surprising them. Like we've said from this study, you remember things better that you're surprised by. So if there's a political operative that wants you to take a message home, they're trying to surprise you with something. If you think about a lot of the cliches of AI, like it's not this, it's this. It's trying to surprise you. It's trying to make your brain think, this is information that I have never come across before. I need to stop and pay attention and remember it. So there are certainly some thematic through lines between what we're talking about in this very fundamental study on surprise, I think.
Angus, I really want to ask you about that. So is it built into AI to surprise us? And if so, who's building that into that?
I don't think so. What I'm saying is I think people are using AI to try and surprise people and grab attention online. And that's why you see this kind of cliche come up so often, that it's not X, it's Y kind of thing. And if you scroll through Instagram Reels for half a second, most people's hook is something like, you're thinking about this completely wrong. And like you spend half an hour on Instagram, and it's like, well, I just don't know anything about anything because apparently I'm thinking about diet wrong and fitness and politics. And the reason is because people are, in my mind, using these AI tools to surprise us and try and hook us and say, you don't know this thing, but I do. Come and pay attention to me.
So, Angus, are you going to live any differently after this? Or I'm just curious, is this going to impact the way, you walk around in the world?
Well, I think turning your brain off and trusting it sort of sounds like a good thing. I mean, the researchers were big fans of using sports metaphors to explain this. And one of the metaphors that they used was a tennis player. So if there's a tennis player sort of ready for this, 200-kilometer serve and she's standing at the other end and she's ready, she can sort of use her, I guess, pre-existing data, if you like, from what's happened in the game and what she knows about her opponent to try and predict where that ball will land in the square. So often you will see tennis players, before the opponent has even hit that ball, start to react so that they can return it really quickly. It's like this unthinking thing. And I was remembering, like, when I've played tennis, and maybe other people when they've played various sports things as well, you do play better when you're not thinking, right? And I think, that's kind of what it made me think of the results of this study. And you can also sort of, see that in the World Cup as well. Like a goalkeeper has to start reacting before that strike has even been made, right? And maybe that's part of this brain process at play. But the counterpoint to that is that, if this tennis player is standing there and the ball goes down the middle of the box instead of to the side and she goes the wrong way, she's going to remember that ball and exactly where it landed in a lot better detail. And she's going to be like, oh God, and crushed by it because that vivid memory capturing mode is activated, which I think is really interesting.
Oh my God, maybe this is why we, when we look back to our childhood, we often think about the really bad stuff. Is this why?
Totally. Well, interesting question, Sam, because like they didn't look at, whether this works particularly well for good and bad things. Like it was kind of like a neutral test. But you're completely right. Like it's the bad, big surprises that we remember the most vividly. And that's another thing that I think this study speaks to.
Oh my gosh, Angus, it's always a good time with you. Thank you so much once again for your time.
Anytime, Sam. Thank you.
Today's episode was produced by Josh Towers. Our executive producer is Tammy Mills, and our podcasts are overseen by Lisa Muxworthy and Tom McKendrick. If you like our show, follow The Morning Edition and leave a review for us on Apple or Spotify. Thanks for listening.